Hello again, Phil Croshaw here from Passions, and in this episode I welcome Simon Jones to the show from Helping Rhinos. And the clue of Simon's passion is in the title. We're going to be talking about rhinos, we're going to be talking about fundraising, we're going to be talking about his journey into making a living from his passion, and we're going to be also talking about horny coffee. Enjoy. Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to this edition of Passions. And we have another conservation treat for you today. On Passions, on the Passions channel, we've been exploring and looking into and interviewing people all about all sorts of different areas of conservation, which is really, really key and really important now in today's ever stressed out planet, I guess you could say. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Jones. And for those of you that have watched a few of these, you'll know that sometimes I struggle with pronouncing names. Well, there's no problem with Simon Jones. I can say that one really, really easily. So a very warm welcome to Passions, Simon. There's a clue over your left shoulder, but tell us who you are and what your passion is.
Yeah. Firstly, hello, Phil. Thank you for inviting me onto your passion series. It's delighted to be here. Yes, perhaps no great surprise that my passion is rhinos and rhino conservation particularly. I'm the founder and CEO of what started as a UK charity, now is an international charity called Helping Rhinos. And I'm sure we're going to go on and explain and talk about the journey that from where it started to where we're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's fascinated me, as I said in the intro, the fact that I've done a number of interviews now and numerous interviews about people's passions particularly for animals and conservation, as I said. So we've had cheetah fanatics, if that's the right word, gorilla fanatics, all sorts of different animals. And now we're talking about a rhino fanatic in the nicest possible way. One of the things that's intriguing me and making me think as I go through this journey is, why is it that different people choose different animals? What is it about the animal that resonated with them to the degree where they're prepared to put the time and effort and energy in to that, not just to the conservation agenda, but also to that particular animal? So that's a question in a sense, is why rhinos?
Why rhinos? And it's a question I've been asked a lot over the last 10 years and a question I think I've failed to articulate effectively. And probably that's because of where your question's coming from, I suppose, is, I don't know, it's something within, I think if there's one particular species, but as with most people into conservation, would actually be passionate about all animals. But there's something somewhere inside that makes you be drawn to one particular species. So long before setting up Helping Rhinos, the first time I ever managed to get to Africa and go on safari, the usual ranger question that you get asked when you get in the vehicle is, what do you want to see most? And I was just like, rhinos. I had no idea why. And actually, and even before that, I was actually going on a photography course at the Cotswold Wildlife Park here in the UK. And the format of the day was you spent the morning in the classroom being taught about shutter speeds and aperture and such likes and setting your camera up. And then the afternoon was out going around the safari park taking pictures. And halfway through the afternoon, you come back in and show them what you've done, and they critique it before you go out again. And so we come back in the afternoon and they took my memory card, put it on, and they went through and they went, okay, so you've been in the rhino house and what else? And I was like, no, I didn't go anywhere else. I spent the whole afternoon in the rhino house looking at eyes and ears. And so and then you get to Africa. I still remember that feeling of seeing my first rhino in the wild. And so I don't know why rhinos, but I suppose what I do know is why that passion for rhinos ended up doing what I'm doing now, which was really on the back of the poaching crisis in Africa at the moment. In fact, the journey to my passion, if you like, it has been a long one. So before getting into conservation, professionally, I actually was in the corporate sector. I worked for American Express for 24 years. And I was actually volunteering at the big cat sanctuary as it is now, which I know you had Giles Clark on. So actually before Giles was there, I was there, and I'd taken a year out from American Express to be working full-time down there for a year. And it was halfway through that year that there was a particularly bad rhino poaching incident on a reserve. I'd spent time a couple of years previously on a conservation project, and it was that made me think, you know what, I was kind of ready to look to doing something about protecting animals in their natural habitat. And the fact that it was rhinos, I'd been there, so there was an emotional attachment. I've got a corporate background. I'd now got quite a bit of experience working in the charity sector. It just kind of all came together and in fact, it was rhinos. It all came together that says, I think I can actually make a difference here.
I've got to ask you something now. Now, I know I'm interrupting you, but I think that's a fascinating point you've just made there. Obviously, there's a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, and perhaps I was one back in the day when I gave up my corporate career to do my own thing. Yeah. But I think it's very interesting. Can you remember the thought process that you went through that said, okay, I'm in corporate, I'm doing corporate things. What was the thought process where you thought, you know what, I want to go and do something really different, go and volunteer? I guess did you say you gave up the job, the day job, as it were, to go and work with?
I was on a sabbatical, so I was
sabbatical, right?
Because I was on corporate pay for a year doing a wildlife conservation job. So, I suppose it wasn't an immediate. Somewhere within you had a passion, for as long as I can remember as a little child, watching the David Attenborough programs on telly and dreaming of getting to Africa one day. And I think so that first time I did was actually on the back of a business trip, back in the corporate life. And then it was to Kenya, and I took 4 days holiday and went on safari for one night in the Nakuru National Park and a couple of nights in the Masai Mara. And I still remember stood up in the vehicle, I think it was in Nakuru actually, even before I got to the Mara, looking out at these open plains we were driving through. There wasn't an animal in sight, and it was like being in an Attenborough program, just actually seeing it with your own eyes, And I think that then reinforced that passion that's kind of always been there inside, and then actually coming across somebody and learning about the cat sanctuary, and that was relatively close to where I was. So, started volunteering there, kind of badgering them and say, like, you need to let me come and volunteer at the weekends. and that started then the opportunity to spend a year there. And by which time I was in full transition mode. And I remember in 2009 saying to, I think it was the head keeper at the time at the sanctuary, saying, in 5 years time I'll be working in conservation and not in corporate. I don't know how or what that looks like, but I've set myself a 5-year roadmap to make this transition. And that's actually quite important, because I think when you have that passion, you want to make it happen now. It can be very difficult to just drop everything. So you need to have a bit of a roadmap that says, right, do I need to retrain in anything? What else do I need to learn? What experience can I get? And just finding out more about it. So it wasn't an overnight decision to decide to make the move from corporate to conservation. I suppose what did happen quite quickly was, that while I was there, but in terms of the piece with rhinos happened quickly, because this rhino poaching incident happened. And it feels like it was about a month I was kind of laying in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and just coming up with a plan to change the world, and then you wake up at sort of 7, 8 o'clock again and get on with your everyday life. But actually it was about 3 or 4 days is all it took before I was right. Okay, we're going to do this. This is, I can make a difference, and it's now or never. The animals are getting poached at a horrendous rate, and they need us now. So now's the time.
Do you know, I found those stories fascinating, because I didn't do anything as grand as that, but I went around the world for a year, and I was in corporate, like we said, and I mentioned this on one or two shows, and I went around and I had the same kind of, you know, thought process, but in a slightly different way. I just wanted to see the world and work out really what I wanted to do. I think you in corporate, you tend to get to where you get to, you realize you can actually do it, you realize you've got some decent skills, but then I think if you're the sort of person that, well, like me, who gets bored easy, you know, I needed a new challenge. So what I did is I gave up the job, you know, scary as hell, and then went around the world for a year. But I think it's fascinating because I do talk to a lot of people who, like you said there, they dream about doing it. They dream about doing what you've just said. They dream about traveling the world, but they never actually take the action, the fear. Were you fearful of that, or were you so excited about doing it that it was like, no, this is what I'm going to do, and I don't have a worry in the world about it?
It's interesting, isn't it? So, because people have said to me many times, then you were so brave to make that change, and it never felt brave. It just felt like the thing I was going to do. But there also wasn't a flick of a switch. So, you know, I had to finish the second 6 months at the cat sanctuary. So whilst they were incredibly supportive of me setting up Helping Rhinos, I had to finish that year. And then I had to go back to American Express for 3 months before I could do anything about that, or you have to pay back the 12 months salary they paid you on your sabbatical. So that wasn't an option. So, so I had to go back there. And actually I stayed at Amex then. I actually went after the 3 months part-time. So it was 3 days there and 2 days plus weekends, of course, and evenings, working on the charity, building it up. So, and that was another couple of years being part-time. And then the role I was in was made redundant, and that, I suppose, was the moment of fear, because, you know, so the first was okay. You had to take a 30% pay cut or whatever, you know, in terms of because you've gone part time. But actually, at that moment, it was like, okay, the charity's not ready to support me yet financially. And now I'm being made redundant. So what does that look like? And it was like, it's come too early, you know. But I couldn't also turn down the opportunity of taking the redundancy payments. And actually, in the end, I lived off that redundancy for 2 years, whilst then going full time with the charity to build it up. So I suppose you could argue there was a degree of fortune in circumstances that allowed me to work for 2 years for that, you know, for living off the redundancy. But even then, you know, that's a massive change in your lifestyle. Suddenly we're not going out for meals quite as much as we were. We're not going on holidays quite as much as we were. You know, my wife's going around the supermarket checking the price of every single item that we're so really going through that, you know. And then even when you start to earn a salary where you're able to, you know, it's less than 20% of what you were earning in the corporate sector. So there are certainly a lot of challenges, and I think that's where people come and say, you know, you were really brave to make that step. But as I said, it never felt brave. Even to this day, it doesn't feel like it was brave. It was just like there was no part in my head that was not going to succeed, because it was more than me. You know, that the rhinos are being killed at 3 or 4 a day. They need me far more than I need that security.
Absolutely. You know, I am going deeper on this because I just find it really intriguing. I know it's something that a lot of people talk to me about in my business consultancy and business coaching business. It's something that comes up an awful lot. So I guess you weren't what you might call a charity setting up expert when all this started. So how did you go about the learning process? What did you need to do and were there any major surprises in that learning process in terms of the setting up of it?
Yeah, I think there is. And again, you look back now and you think, oh, of course you would do things differently. So, you know, the first thing I learned was, you know, to really have any credibility, you need to be a registered charity with the Charities Commission. But you can't actually become a registered charity with the Charities Commission until your income is over £5,000. So you've got to try and generate, you know, have an official setup and generate income as a charity, even £5,000, when you don't have that number and backup. So, you know, but even before that step, I guess, is, you know, there was no great, I wanted to get involved in protecting rhinos. It wasn't necessarily the goal to set up a new charity. I just knew that I wanted to transition into, and I had areas that I felt was important. So, you know, so we actually spent the first year partnering with another rhino charity while we established up, and effectively became a fundraiser for them, but with a degree of, okay, here's how we want to help. And the reason I ended up going down a charity was education, and international education for me was quite important. That was a bit I'd seen at the cat sanctuary, you know, when you're taking people around, that educating them on conservation and having an opportunity, and realizing that actually the majority of people in this country particularly know what conservation is, but don't really have an understanding of the threat our wildlife is, especially if you go back 9 years. I think there's more of a threat now. You know, there's a lot more environmental issues in the press and the media than there was 9-10 years ago. So no one was doing that education. So that was, in the end, that was what the driving force between setting up a new organization. So having made that decision, it was then, how do we go from there? So, you know, we got through that first hurdle fairly quickly, and then you have to start thinking about, you know, boards of trustees. So who do you get on your board of trustees? So that's looking at people who can add value. You know, what do we need? Okay, the first thing we need is someone to, you know, and this is where the corporate background really helps, because yes, we're here for the passion. We just want to do what we want to do for rhinos, but actually now I've got to have accounts that we've got to produce every year, and all of the admin stuff that you need to have. So, you know, so we brought on, you know, an original board of trustees. Obviously, you've transitioned, people have come and gone since then, and we have a completely different board and a bigger board than we had then. But again, we needed that to get through that first stage. You know, when you're looking at the first year generating, you know, £14,000 in our annual revenue, to like 9 years on, last year was over 400,000. So, you know, we've raised now over £1 million in that decade, and so you evolve and you change as you go with it. So if we went back to the setup we were 9 years ago, we'd be embarrassed, but at the time that was the right setup. You know, we couldn't have had the type of setup we've got now with what where we were then.
Do you know, I don't think it's probably any different, is it? If you were Marks and Spencer's once upon a time selling, what was it, trainers out of the back of a van or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That could be a bit embarrassing compared with the way it is, now. How did you go about
it? Is, sorry, I was going to say, but it is very different. You know, and as I said, it's, I mean, we always say that as a charity, that we run the charity as a business, you know, and any business is there to generate maximum profits for its shareholders, you know. And then I kind of said the line is, as a joke one day, but it's relatively true, that's exactly how we should operate. And I think every charity should operate. It's just that our shareholders are munching grass on the plains of Africa and not sitting in a boardroom somewhere. And if we have that philosophy of how we want to grow and adapt, and there's a whole nother story, Phil, I'm sure we could get into later if we have time. I always think is like, you know, conservation, it frustrates the life out of me that conservation generally is seen as a charitable sector and reliant on handouts, and, you know, and actually that's important. That'll never go away, but we need to think about how we, you know, evolve from there, and how, you know, one thing we're particularly focused on is how can we create a sustainable transaction-based revenue that comes into conservation. So as an example, you know, we launched a brand of coffee that we called Horny Coffee, and very specifically, I must say, capital letters for horn and then a small I, rather than the other way you spell it. Don't put that into Google, you'll find all sorts of things you don't want. But
a great way to get attention.
But it gets
marketing
attention.
Genius.
Exactly, and it also it's also an anagram. When you spell it with an I, it's an anagram of rhino as well. So that works.
Yes.
We've created safaris and coffee, but coffee being the first real that. So, you know, so people can now help by actually not giving donations, just switching their brand of coffee to Horny, and we're not asking you to give us a donation. I mean, we'd love you to give us a donation too, but we're not asking you to give us a donation. We'll just switch your brand of coffee, and that brings an income into conservation. And I think that's the sort of the mindset where we need to change in the conservation sector to think about how else can we generate income to support us sustainably going forward.
That is such a refreshing perspective. You know, charity, you know, in my view, and I've had a number of conversations about this, actually, funnily enough, with our mutual friend Spencer Phillips. And, you know, this whole thing about, I use the term lightly, really, but the shaking the tin, as I refer to it as, in probably a disrespectful way. But it's basically that whole idea of give me money, give us money, give us money, give us money, give us money. And there's millions of different people saying it and shouting it. And one of the things that I've always thought, and you've just confirmed it there, is wherever possible, if you're able to give value back, then even on principle, it says something rather than shaking the tin. Is that a fair synopsis?
It's absolutely. And I think, the COVID crisis, I think, highlights that, for us as well. We'll talk about that, what the impact that's had on conservation on the ground, in Africa and around the world. But even for charities, it's going to be a bit like my own personal had a 5-year plan. This is, we're not going to change overnight. So we will, as I said, we will always rely on the shaking the tin element of that as well, but we have to stop completely relying on it, because you have a crisis like we've had now where people suddenly become very uncertain of their financial situations. We were quite fortunate. We didn't fall off the cliff as far as donations went, but we felt that was a real possibility. So you need to be thinking about, okay, we put all our eggs in one basket. Yes, it's great. Fundraising events that we do are fantastic, but we can't rely on those completely, because if something happens like a global pandemic that impacts that, you've got no backup and support. Whereas our coffee sales actually went up because the coffee shops are shut, so people want a good coffee that they can drink at home. Especially
with a name like that, there's absolutely no question, is there? No, I mean, as a marketing guy, I just find genius in those sorts of concepts, which is why I'm kind of getting quite excited about it. So yeah, obviously, like you said, I think a part of it is, at the very least, the charity needs to be thinking about it. It doesn't mean say charity will come up with 900 magic pixie dust ideas, but I think if you're thinking about it in an entrepreneurial way, which is what I would say you are doing, then there's a chance you will come up with a horny coffee and something else and something else.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think that, the entrepreneurial way is it, as I said, charities should be run as businesses, because that's what will make them sustainable. And ultimately, the cause of what we're fighting for needs us to be sustainable, because that protects you against things like a global pandemic.
It does. I suppose it's the reality, the commercial reality, I suppose, versus the romance of it, is the way I sometimes see it. Yeah. So obviously, we've kind of slightly ignored our good friend over your left shoulder there a little bit. We've been into the business side, but obviously I'm keen to explore the rhino's perspective on all this. Interestingly, very recently, I saw a news report on the TV within the last couple of weeks about the thought process of starting to take the horn off all rhinos in a certain area. I've got two questions, really. What exactly is that about, and what's your views on it as a strategy?
Okay, so I guess the first thing we should just be clear at, is for anyone watching who's not familiar with why rhinos are under threat that they are. So the biggest threat over the last decade has been the poaching of rhinos. So, if you go back, South Africa has 80% of Africa's rhinos are in South Africa. So we go back to 2014, we lost 1,215 rhinos to poachers in 2014. That compared to 13 in 2007. So there was a massive spike from 2008 onwards. And they're poached for their horn, and their horn is made of keratin, which is the same substance as our hair and our fingernails. And what'll happen is the poachers will just come in, 9 times out of 10 will actually shoot and kill the rhino, and then take the horn off. It's very useful having a prop behind me. Take the horn off, and they'll drill right into the sinus cavity down here to get every last little element that they can. And again, if we go back 5, 6 years, this rhino horn, made of nothing different to our hair and our fingernails, was selling for between $65,000 and $100,000 per kilogram on the black market. And that made it a more expensive commodity, if that's the right word, than gold or platinum or heroin or cocaine, which is just for nothing more than compressed hair. Is just ridiculous. So obviously we have seen a slight downward trend over that period of time. But even last year, we lost 396, 396 rhinos last year. So you think, well, 296 last year, and about 100 more the year before. So we've seen a downward trend, but the population is also seeing a downward trend, and that has an impact on the number of rhinos that are poached. And there are a number of different strategies that are being used, and one of those is what we call dehorning, which is then what you're referring to, Phil, where people are cutting the horns off. So again, like your hair and your fingernails, you cut your fingernails and they grow back. So if you would cut off a rhino horn about here, it would grow back, and it has about a 4-year growth cycle. So the view is that has to be a deterrent to the poaching. If they're only coming in and killing the rhino for its horn, if you take its horn off in a humane way by a vet, then that has to be a good thing. And it definitely has proved to be successful in a lot of locations. I think the thing we have to remember is, we've got some, when we talk about relatively small locations and reserves where rhinos are kept in, we talk about relatively small, it would take you at least half a day to drive around them. So they're not that small. We're not talking about zoo type enclosures, but compared to something like Kruger National Park in South Africa, which is the size of Wales, then it's they're relatively small. So and they are typically have fences around the borders to keep the animals in and the people out. And so it becomes much easier to try and protect your rhino population and protect your borders. And having a deterrent like it doesn't have the horn on the end of its nose has proved successful. You have to keep doing that procedure every couple of years. So again, long-term solution, it's not ideal or not great, because you've got to keep knocking the rhino out to do the procedure. So it's not great, but if it keeps the rhino alive in the meantime, then it's worth doing. Somewhere like Kruger, although they are now starting to look at it, but it's more difficult to do that, both from a financial perspective, because the volume of rhinos that typically have been there. Although I should say that the rhino population in Kruger has depleted by 70% in the last 3 years. So the white rhino population, that is. So that makes it slightly more achievable. So it definitely improves. But I think what we has to be seen as a short, possibly to mid-term measure, and it needs to be seen as part of the tool in our anti-poaching armory. So we still need boots on the ground. We still need canine units that protect them. One of the biggest things is still intelligence gathering from within the local communities. So we have a bit of a heads up as to when and where poachers may attack. And the problem, the other slight problem you have is while it becomes a deterrent, if you start taking the horns off of all rhinos, they still have this stump here. And while the value of the horn has gone down, gone down over the last 5 years to probably about $25,000 per kilogram now, that's still a significant amount for even the stump that will be left on the rhinos.
Yeah, still worth it. Yeah.
So we've seen, in some of our projects in the Kruger area, we've lost a few rhinos since Easter, and all of them have been dehorned rhinos.
Yeah.
So the short, that was a very long answer to your question.
No, it's fine.
But so I suppose the summary is, yes, it does work, and it seems to be working in the majority of places. So is it worth doing? Yes. Do I personally see it as a long-term solution? I sincerely hope not, and I don't think anybody should see it as a long-term solution. I think we'd like to all get back to the days that rhinos look like this, with a horn on the end of their nose rather than a stump on the end of their nose. But if that stump means it keeps them alive while we work on what are the longer term solutions, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah, it's a contributing opportunity rather than a fix, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Yeah, no, it's fascinating stuff. So obviously this rhino horn is extremely valuable. Who exactly is it valuable to?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So it's it gets, the rhinos are poached wherever. So there are 5 species of rhino, 2 in Africa, the white and the black rhino, and then there are actually 3 species in Asia. The greater one-horned, or the Indian rhino, the Javan rhino, and the Sumatran rhino, and those population numbers are a lot lower than the African population. So if we look at the African species first and foremost, so most of the biggest markets, or destination markets as we call them, are Vietnam and China. The sort of long-term belief, unfortunately, like a lot of illegal wildlife trade, is stemmed in the traditional Chinese medicine. So there's lots of talk. You've probably seen in the media a lot that it's believed that rhino horn can act as an aphrodisiac. That's disputed to a certain extent. But what it certainly does is, they believe it can cure anything from a common cold to a cancer. And therefore it gets, it's illegal to trade in rhino horn, so there's only a black market in it. And I guess any time where you get that black market, that you get the illegal trade coming up. So illegal wildlife trade is now the fourth illicit trade in the world, behind only arms, drugs, and human trafficking. So there is a demand for it now. You kind of ended up in this vicious circle where there's an increasing demand for it as do many Asian populations become generally more wealthy, so more of the population can afford
of course, yeah,
something like the rhino horn on the black market. That drives a greater demand, which pushes the price up even further. And then we ended up in a situation where it actually was being used as a status symbol as much as anything else. So, particularly in Vietnam, it was seen as a bit of a party drug. So, wealthy businessmen would offer a potential, customer, would he like some rhino horn ground up in his wine? Didn't really want to offer him the rhino horn. He just wanted this other person to know he could afford the rhino horn to offer him. The analogy I use quite often is, it's a bit like if you have a Ferrari and you offer a potential business contact a lift in your Ferrari. You don't really want to give him a lift in your Ferrari. You just want him to know you've got a Ferrari you can offer him a lift in.
Show off, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%.
And like anything, then it becomes a status symbol. So now that drives the price even further up. So we've got these syndicates sitting, around the world, and the same criminal syndicates that are driving drugs and such likes, switching to illegal wildlife trade, because actually they feel the risk is less on illegal wildlife trade than it is on things like drugs and human trafficking. And that probably still is the case now, although it's slowly improving, and we are seeing some bigger sentences handed out, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. So now with the advantage, I think we've seen that demand coming down is, when we look at it as a status symbol, it's like anything. Things have fashions, and fashions come and go, and we are, fingers crossed, starting to see a slight change. If you listen to what the likes of Interpol are telling us, there is a slight change and reduction in demand at that level of it. So that can only be a good thing. But there's still a lot of work to do on addressing the demand elsewhere, particularly where it is used as a medicine. And it's very easy for us to sit here and say, it's ridiculous. It doesn't have any scientific, medical, properties whatsoever. And we've done all sorts of tests to prove that. But the human mind is a wonderful thing, and if different cultures believe things strong enough, then then they have those very fixed and firm beliefs. But also, if your loved one is next to you in a lot of pain and has cancer, and someone comes and says you should buy this rhino horn, it will cure your loved one of cancer, how many of us would say we wouldn't try everything we could if someone convinced you that they had a magical cure? So a little bit like the other side with the poachers, people often say, oh, poachers, of course, poachers are very poor, and the syndicates know that, and that's why they recruit these poachers, into killing the animals. So they're very poor, and often have families who are starving, and will, could potentially earn up to 5 years' salary for one night's work. So again, who's to say how you would react? I'm sure many people watching this have said on numerous occasions, I think I said it yesterday several times, I'm starving. Well, you don't really know what it's like to be starving. If you're truly starving, what would you do? So I think we have to be mindful of all of that. The flip side, I'm absolutely not defending poachers or people who take rhino horn. We need to stop that. There are people who are starving, who are very poor, who don't go poaching because they have a sense of right or wrong. But we just need to understand the whole picture, and then that will help us try and find solutions. And that's actually what we're working on in the field a lot at the moment, which is engaging local people and giving them the opportunity to improve livelihoods, not through killing the wildlife, but for working with us on conserving it.
Yeah, I guess it's the same as people who live in deprived areas. Some people turn to crime, and other people become motivated. I know some of these people who become motivated and dedicated to making sure that their kids or their family don't end up in the same situation as they were brought up in. And they basically I use this term again lightly, but, drag themselves out of that deprivation to create a better life. And then others just get sucked into the crime and everything else. And the rest is history. And it sounds very, very similar to that. But I know what you mean, and this is something that's come up a lot, Simon, in the interviews I've done. With Ian Redmond, for example, with the gorillas and such like, and it's more complicated than most people probably realise. Where does most of the funds that you raise, where would you say it tends to get distributed to what activities does it get distributed?
So it's a good question, Phil. So the way we've chosen who we work with on the ground, and that in itself is quite a decision to make. A number of people have said to me, why don't we just go and buy plots of land and create rhino sanctuaries in Africa? So Helping Rhinos is the end-to-end piece. And actually, fundamentally, I think that's the wrong approach. So we've taken an approach where we work alongside experts in the field. As much as I would love to think I'm an expert at going out and running a game reserve, or, I was brought up here, I had a background in corporate, as we discussed. So my strength is actually raising the funds here. So to actually work and have, instead of lots of different silos, let's try and work together and have people playing to their strengths. So that's what we've done. So we've identified our projects on the ground, and then our approach has been a partnership approach rather than just throwing money at them. We kind of try and really engage and form a partnership with them. So our key main projects that we have, so Helping Rhinos is the main financial supporter of at least a rhino work on those projects, and they're in South Africa and Kenya. So we work with a rhino orphanage, the Zululand Rhino Orphanage, and I have to say we've just finished an emergency appeal for a little one-day-old rescued orphan that we brought in. So there's some very cute video footage if you go onto our website and have a look at that. So we work with that orphanage as well. We also work with in South Africa the Black Mamba's anti-poaching unit, and that's the first all-female anti-poaching unit. So again, a real innovative approach to conservation, because it's taking perhaps one of the biggest underused resources on the continent, which is the women in the local community, and tapping into their passion and dedication, obviously finding the right people and bringing them into conservation, because then they do a great job at selling conservation and becoming role models within their community. We also do some work in the Eastern Cape. So I mentioned a poaching earlier incident that happened. So not specifically just on that reserve, but around their foundations and working with the local people out there. And again, education programs. And I'll come and talk about some of the other work in a minute, but we also then work with the Alpejita Conservancy in Kenya, which is home to the last 2 northern white rhinos in the world. But for us, or for me, and most significantly, they are home to the largest population of black rhino in East and Central Africa. So that part there was key around who we work with, because I was always very adamant that we would work with projects and initiatives that are looking to protect the species of rhino as a whole, and not just an individual population. We could pick one place, as I mentioned earlier, and we could have a dozen rhinos on that reserve, and we could make them effectively bulletproof, by their amount of protection. But we're saving 12 rhinos. We need to be saving 20,000 rhinos, not 12 rhinos. So that's our approach of who we work with, looking at how innovative is their approach to conservation, how open are they to working with us as a partnership and engaging with us. And I have to say that our partners we've got have worked really well. And that's where I think the money is then best distributed. So for the best part of the last decade, most of that has gone on anti-poaching work in some form, whether that's funding, I mentioned before the dog units, which have proved extremely effective as a deterrent, as well as deterrent, as well as actually preventing poaching when it's happening. Whether it's technology, we've been funding what we call an Eyes in the Sky program, which is funding a pilot, again, a huge success story, taking a guy that you mentioned earlier, who really had the drive to better himself from the local community, put himself through, or managed to get a scholarship to put himself through pilot training, qualified as a commercial pilot, which is his passion ultimately, but his other passion is conservation. So he's flying our anti-poaching plane to build up his hours. I mentioned the orphanage as well. That's really important in terms of every rhino counts. So we need to, just because we lose one rhino, it doesn't mean there has to become two because there's a calf, if we can find a way to save that calf as well. So that's where money has been going and will continue to go. That is incredibly important. But as we spoke earlier, as the poaching starts to come down, and hopefully we can continue that trend by continuing the work we've been doing over the last decade, other elements and other issues affecting the future of rhino become to the fore. And so we're now looking at what I'm referring as a much more holistic approach to rhino conservation. So as big a focus on their habitat as we are about the anti-poaching work. So, and actually, I actually firmly believe in the next few years, loss of habitat will become a bigger threat to the future of rhino than even poaching. So it's really important that we look at that now. So we've got an initiative, which again is an evolution of all of our work over the last 9 or 10 years. It's an initiative that we're calling Rhino Strongholds. So we're trying to create areas that can be really strongholds for rhinos to thrive for generations and decades to come. Looking at, and we have 3 pillars of that. We have protect, sustain, and inspire. So protect is all that work I was just talking about. Sustain is looking at the habitat. So there are lots of patches of degraded land. So how do we restore that degraded land and make it so that it can be used and we can bring wildlife into that? We're looking at, there are lots of pockets of private reserves in South Africa with fences around all of them, often a fence down the middle, and you can just drop the fence and you open up this area. So how do we drop those fences and create, and how do we bring land in and create corridors between reserves so that we're opening up a much more natural migratory behavior of animals? That's not to say that rhinos are a migratory species, but they do move around. So a big male, for example, if a new male comes in and defeats an old male, the old male needs to get away from that territory. Well, if there's a fence effectively around its territory, there's nowhere to go, and probably will end up being killed by the younger, stronger male. So if we can open up those areas much more. So that's a big focus of what we're doing there. And then the inspire element is, how do we work with the local people, and how do we engage those local people into conservation much more? So, for example, in one of our stronghold areas in Zululand in South Africa, we're actually now just starting to build a school on the borders there as well, thanks to a very generous donor in the United States. So, and again, that starts to win hearts and minds in the local community, because now they're getting this school facility, and we've positioned it and built it in such a way that it can be used as a bit of a community center as well. So the local chiefs can use it for their community meetings. So all of that, I think, will come to play for what I'm calling a more holistic approach. So again, a very long-winded answer to your question of how.
Yeah, but gosh, I mean, again, just demonstrating the detail that there is around this stuff and the complexities of it all. And what I love about when you talk, though, is that I guess the best way I can describe it is a business-like approach. It's about, I hear words that you've used and other words that I hear in my own head: efficiency, effectiveness, and it's not just about the romance and sustaining it. It's got to be treated in that way, as we've kind of discussed, a bit like a business. Yeah. Okay, well, we're running out of time then, Simon. So I'm going to just ask you a final question. You're perhaps somebody that could be a real inspiration and a real live person who's escaped, and I'm going to put in that inverted commas, their corporate world. Some people love corporate, which is fine, but you've completely shifted what you were doing to what you're now doing. Is there any tips or bit of guidance you could give to anybody that wants to change, wants to make a change, and maybe wants to do something that does make more of a difference in the world and society? Any tips from your own experiences?
I guess the first, the most obvious tip is follow your heart, or at least look into your heart and find out what your passion is. And then I think the next tip would be have some patience and make a plan. As I said, I had a 5-year roadmap, and I think that's important, because otherwise I think you will be doomed to failure. And if you've left your old world to follow your passion and you can't survive in that world, it becomes even more difficult to go back to the world you were in before. So have patience, create a plan as to how you want to get there, and also be realistic as well. If I'm truly honest, if I really was following my passion 100%, I'd have probably shipped up to Africa and gone and moved out there and spent time there, because my passion is being out in nature, with wildlife out there. But I had to be realistic around what was achievable. I was at a time of life, I've got certain commitments here. So how can you find a way to make your life feel more complete by doing what's involved in your passion, but being realistic? So I guess plan and prepare, have some patience, be realistic, and don't be afraid. If you've got that passion and you've got that commitment, then I believe you will find a way to succeed.
Simon, what a great way to finish. It's been an absolute pleasure, really. I've really enjoyed that. I always get takeaways from every interview I do, and this one's no exception. And I think from my point of view, doing these interviews is great, because there's a subconscious awareness that's always there about animals, and particularly obviously rhinos, and I see little bits and pieces on the TV, but then it remains in your subconscious a lot of the time. And these interviews are great even for me personally, because they bring to my conscious mind a reminder of some of the challenges that are being faced, but also some of the people that are doing such amazing work. And congratulations on it. I think it's wonderful, and I'll certainly be keeping an eye on things. Oh, the website you mentioned, do you want to just tell us what it is? Yeah,
sure. So I think that's, people can go and find out a lot more about what I've been talking about. So the website is helpingrhinos.org. There's lots of ways that you can help us and support us, obviously not just by giving donations. That would be lovely, thank you very much, but looking at our merchandise range, all of that goes to help support us. We talked about Horny Coffee, but also have a look under the Get Involved section. There's a Be More Rhino, and that's could be used for adults, but I guess it's aimed at children. But there's a lot of download stuff and fact sheets and word searches and board games, and so things that's not necessarily financial, but things you can do to get involved and help us spread the word around that, why rhinos need us. So yeah, helpingrhinos.org.
Brilliant. Simon, thanks very much indeed for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and all the very best with the future, and all the very best with the work that you're doing with your friend over your left-hand shoulder. Have you got a name, by the way, for your friend over your left-hand shoulder?
I don't think this one does have a name. No, not that it doesn't have a name. We do have names for some of them, but yeah, this one I don't think does. This was just one I came across and was fortunate enough to get close to while he looked well,
nice. Your mission for the next time I talk to you is to come up with a name for the rhino on your left-hand shoulder.
See, I could come up with a name, but often what we do in names, Phil, is we sell those opportunities as a fundraiser. So some people have paid up to £10,000 to name a rhino in the wild. So,
oh, I can tell you're a corporate guy. And very useful it is too. Thanks very much, Simon. All the best.
Talking to you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.